Welcome to our second video on Plainsong Chant. In the first video, we went over the basics of reading Plainsong Chant notation. And so now you should be all ready to chant the Psalms from the Plainsong Psalter. Except, if you turn to any of the Psalms, you'll notice that none of them seem to actually be to any music. That's because, to save space, instead of writing out the notes for each individual word in the Psalm, the Plainsong Psalter provides the psalm tone with marks or pointing that corresponds to marks in the text, so they didn't need to write the notes over each syllable. We'll keep using Psalm 27 and Tone 8 as our main psalm to illustrate how this works. To begin with, the first two syllables correspond to the first two notes, the intonation, in the psalm tone. In some cases, this will correspond to the first two words if they're only one syllable each, such as for in verse 7. For in. In some cases, the first word will be two syllables, in which case you sing the first two notes to the first two syllables, such as therefore in verse 9. Therefore. Next, you sing the syllables up to the first accent mark to the repeated first repeating tone, like in my heart and say in verse 11. In my heart and say. In some instances, you'll have a one-syllable word followed by a two or more syllable word. In these cases, you'll sing the first word and the first syllable of the second word to the intonation, and then begin the first reciting note with the second syllable of the second word, like in verse 2. When evildoers come upon me to eat my flesh. We now get to the mediant cadence, which corresponds to the first accent mark. There are three possibilities for how the mediant cadence can be sung. The first is called an abrupt cadence, when the first half of the verse ends with an accented syllable. In this case, the accent will cover only one syllable, and you only sing the first note of the mediant cadence, like in life in verse 1b. The Lord is the strength of my life. The second possibility is that the first half of the verse ends with two syllables. In this case, you omit the note in parentheses in the mediant cadence, like in shelter in verse 7. For in the day of trouble he shall keep me safe in his shelter. Finally, the first half of the verse may end with three syllables. In that case, you sing all the notes of the mediant cadence, including the one in the parentheses, like in seek my face in verse 11. You speak in my heart and say, seek my face. Note that in some psalm tones there are two or more accent marks after the first reciting note. This should be no problem. Just keep in mind the principles described above and apply them twice. We then come to the asterisk, which, as indicated in the first video, marks the divide between the first and second part of the psalm tone, not a place to break when reading responsively. After the asterisk, you say all the syllables up to the slanted bar on the second reciting note, just like you did with the first reciting note. Then you'll come to the slanted bar, which indicates the preparatory syllables before the final cadence. In the text, you sing the syllables after the slanted bar and before the final accent mark to these notes, like in shall not in verse 3. Yet my heart shall not be afraid. Finally, we get to the last accent mark, corresponding to the final cadence, which functions just like the mediant cadence. The one thing to note is that sometimes a verse will skip over the second reciting note and move directly from the mediant cadence to the preparatory syllables. When this happens, the omission of the second reciting note is indicated by an em dash in the text before the slanted line, like in verse 1a. The Lord is my light and my salvation, whom then shall I fear? There's one final symbol that you'll want to be familiar with in the psalm texts. Remember that in the first video I said that two notes slurred together are meant to be chanted over one syllable? If you look at tone 1-2 in Psalm 30, you see this in play in both the intonation and the final cadence. Just treat the slurred notes like a single unslurred note. They correspond to one syllable in the text. To indicate where you sing slurred notes to a single syllable, the text will have two or more dots above the syllable according to how many slurred notes correspond to it. I know that this seems like a lot of rules, but it's actually a really intuitive system once you get used to it. It's mostly just a matter of matching the marks in the text to the marks in the music and remembering that, with the exception of reciting notes, single notes, or multiple slurred notes, correspond to single text syllables. If you can count syllables, you'll have no problem with reading the psalm pointing. Here's Psalm 27, so you can hear all of this in action. The Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom then shall I fear? The Lord is the strength of my life. Of whom then shall I be afraid? When evildoers came upon me to eat up my flesh, it was they, my foes and my adversaries, who stumbled and fell. Though an army should encamp against me, yet my heart shall not be afraid. And though war should rise up against me, yet will I put my trust in him. One thing I have asked of the Lord, one thing I seek, that I may dwell in the house of the Lord all the days of my life, to behold the fair beauty of the Lord, and to seek him in his temple. For in the day of trouble he shall keep me safe in his shelter. He shall hide me in the secrecy of his dwelling, and set me high upon a rock. Even now he lifts up my head above my enemies round about me. Therefore I will offer in his dwelling an oblation with sounds of great gladness. I will sing and make music to the Lord. Hearken to my voice, O Lord, when I call. Have mercy on me and answer me. You speak in my heart and say, seek my face. Your face, Lord, will I seek. Hide not your face from me, nor turn away your servant in displeasure. You have been my helper, cast me not away. Do not forsake me, O God of my salvation. Though my father and my mother forsake me, the Lord will sustain me. Show me your way, O Lord. Lead me on a level path because of my enemies. Deliver me not into the hands of my adversaries, for false witnesses have risen up against me, and also those who speak malice. What if I had not believed that I should see the goodness of the Lord in the land of the living? O tarry and await the Lord's pleasure, be strong and he shall comfort your heart. Wait patiently for the Lord. To really make the most of using the Plainsong Psalter, you'll also want to know a bit about the antiphons. These are text and music above each psalm tone. Chanting the antiphons is pretty straightforward since each syllable corresponds to the chant notation. Knowing which antiphon to choose is also straightforward because they're determined by the church season and noted as such. So, the antiphon for other Sundays and weekdays, essentially the green seasons of the church, for Psalm 27 goes like this. I will offer in his dwelling an oblation with sounds of great gladness. The only real question left is how to use the antiphons with the psalms. The usual practice is to sing the whole appointed antiphon before the psalm and then after the psalm or after the Gloria Patri if it is used with the psalm. You should not sing the antiphon after both the last verse and after the Gloria Patri. It is also possible to have the verse of the psalm sung by a cantor or small group and then have the congregation respond with the antiphon after each set of verses. And now you should have the principles in place to be able to start implementing Plainsong chant in your congregation. It may seem a bit overwhelming at first, but with some practice, chanting the psalms will become very natural for you. In our final Plainsong chanting video, we'll go over how to chant other parts of the service, including the scripture readings.